Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Today on the live stream, we have a 5 times world record adventurer. He's run across Australia and he's had a shotgun stuffed in his mouth by a bloody Australian crazed farmer, and he faced disembowelment with Japanese monks. Would you please help me welcome to the live stream, Richard Bowles? Thank you.
Oh, welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much. You know what? There's two things I took away from that introduction, mate, and that was the fact that you sound like the Truman Show, and the other one, and the other one is that you make me sound like I'm something I'm not.
Well, you know, I was watching one of your videos, and you said with that introduction, I even want to hear my own speech.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Well, look, it's kind of a corny line to say, but. Yeah, sometimes when I do keynote presentations, people sort of ham it up so much that I get on a stage and I feel like I've got to try and somehow bring myself down onto, you know, the audience's level to some degree, because otherwise they think that I'm this untouchable person, and I'm not. Right? I'm an everyday guy. I don't wear the undies on the outside of my pants. I'm not Superman. Maybe a little bit deranged, but you know, apart from that, I'm this everyday guy who's just living life and struggling like everybody else.
Well, you know, I train NLP and I train linguistics, and there's a temporal word that we can put in there just after you say, I don't wear the underpants on the outside yet. So yes. It implies there's always time.
I need to get myself a cape. Is that what you're trying to tell me, Daniel?
Well, you know, I've got a daughter, and she dressed herself to go to drum lessons the other day, and her panties were in the outside of her jeans, and she rocks. And so if she's one of the cool kids, I better start to do it also.
Absolutely. Definitely. I agree.
Well, you've had an interesting life. You're a 5 times world record holder. You're the first man to run the Bicentenary Trail, which is a 5,330 kilometre run from the southern parts of Australia all up to the north. And it took you 174 days to do it. What's going on there?
Something like that.
Are you crazy?
Well, look, it's a funny thing that people say that, because you know when I actually attempted that, well, I didn't attempt, I completed it, but I did that back in 2012, and I was actually supporting a mental health charity, which is a great thing to do, but it actually came about because people used to say, are you crazy? So initially it started off being kind of a funny thing that, oh, we'll support mental health because then I'm kind of, you know, it's an investment in my future, let's say. But then I quickly learned from the charity that I had to be quite careful what I did say using those kind of words, which meant interviews like this during that period very, very difficult to do, as you can imagine.
What do we say? It's the complex equivalence. It's what do I really mean on the inside, and then we've got to try to get ourselves out of those wet paper bags. So
yeah, absolutely,
it's 5,330 kilometres, and it's 174 days. What goes into the mental preparation for this run? I know there's going to be a lot of physical preparation, but what do you do for the mental side of it?
Well, it's funny. I'm glad you put it like that, Daniel, because actually what I find fascinating is that people think it's this physical feat, and in fact, it is completely the opposite. You said a lot of work goes into the physical preparation, but really I think a lot of work goes into the mental preparation for something like that. Because, you know, you understand when you take on something so ginormous, basically running for that long in the wilderness, carrying most of your stuff on your back, sleeping out alone, you know, sometimes not getting water or food. You know there's going to be times when you want to give up. And I really focused hard on those moments before I went into this. I understand very clearly that when I go into a new project, be it an adventure or be it this particular run, or even in my work life, I don't shy away from the things that are going to potentially stop me, which is always me. So I focus a lot on where along the route will I decide to or want to pull the pin or give up. And on such a giant adventure like that, you realize, I guess, that you know that some stage, as I said, you're going to want to give up. A different stage, you're going to be going, I'm tired, I can't be bothered. You're going to be hungry, you're going to be cold, you're going to be wet, you could potentially be injured. And you know there's a whole array of things that can potentially arise that's going to leave you in fear, a whole bunch of anxiety and lots of complex situations to overcome. So what I'm saying is, before I go into any adventure or I pursue any goal, I'm really focused on the negative side of things, which can sound kind of counterintuitive because, people say, well, don't you focus on the positive? Don't you say, look, I'm going to do this. I've got this, you're using the right language. You're moving towards this great goal. And I go, that kind of takes care of itself. That's never the problem. The problem is staying like that. So really, I'm about trying to figure out those hurdles and those barriers and those obstacles that will arise before I ever go on the solo pursuit of trying to finish something like that.
As soon as I saw the numbers there, I went 5,330 kilometres. Okay, I know the distance, and I looked at the 174 days, and I already pulled the pin. I started to think about it going, well, what am I going to bloody do for 174 days? So what I know about most people is they give up on their goals before the very first attempt. And even when I saw the distance didn't concern me, but I went, the time that it was going to take, the commitment of 174 days, that freaked me out when I saw it. When you decided to do this and you were preparing mentally, what were some of the big obstacles that you thought you'd overcome? What were them, and specifically around these fears? Because we just chatted offline and talking about lockdown in Melbourne. We've got all these emotions coming up, but what about these fears for you? What were the ones that came up?
Yeah, well, on the actual adventure itself, I mean, there was probably two moments that I can strongly remember because they are kind of wacky. The first one was crossing the Daintree River, which, if anyone's familiar with Australia or lives in Queensland, knows what the Daintree River is famous for, which is crocodiles. And I crossed that on foot, so it was a huge fear for me, and probably some stupidity involved in that as well. And the other one was actually on that particular journey, I bumped into, let's say, I'm going to call him an angry farmer because it's just better to say that. But he wanted to blow my brains out, and he decided he was going to put a shotgun in my mouth and utter those words to me, which is, as you can imagine, was an extremely fearful moment and something I still think about a lot now, because it's, as I say these words now, I can still remember, that cold gun barrel and that smell of steel, it was on my lips, I could just smell that now. So, that's a pretty terrifying experience.
These two fears here, I'd put them in the category of death. These are the fears of death and dying. So how do you...
Well, they are. Well, I guess to your point, sorry, I think we've got a delay, Daniel, but I think just on your point there, yeah, they are, because they're legitimate fears. Because as you say, there's danger, and then there's the fears where you just kind of make them up yourself. But I think the important thing to remember is that both of those fears, when you feel them, feel exactly the same. If you're scared to do something that relatively speaking is never going to harm you or do anything wrong, you're just scared to do it, the feeling's the same. It's almost like you are going to cross a crocodile infested river. So as much as it might seem extreme, because it is, it's the same. That how you overcome those fears and deal with those kind of feelings and anxieties are exactly the same.
So, ladies and gentlemen, if you're joining us on the live now, make sure you type in the chat box below. Make sure you say g'day, say hello, let us know where you're from. We're being joined by a 5 times world record holder, and he's done the Bicentenary Trail, running 5,330 kilometres across Australia, and it took him 174 days. He's crossed a croc-infested river, the Daintree River. He's had a shotgun shoved in his mouth, and the farmer wanted to blow his brains out. You can remember the taste of steel. Now, just to highlight this for some of our guests here, we're born with two fears. The first one is the fear of loud noises, and the second one is the fear of falling. So you've learned this fear along the way. You've had this fearful experience. How do you continue after you've had these two big fears? One of getting eaten alive by a crocodile, and the other one, some crazy farmer wants to blow your brains out. How do you continue after that? What resiliency is required?
Well, are you talking post the traumatic experience, if you like, or are you talking, previous to that?
Continue on your run. So you've had the experience. How do you continue after that?
So you have to continue, otherwise you're just going to die in the wilderness. So that's the first thing. You don't really get a choice. But I don't keep that fear with me. And the thing is, when you move through fear, you feel amazing afterwards. It's actually quite, you're elated. You give yourself a tremendous amount of confidence. you go, wow, if I can do that, what's stopping me now? So it's actually easy to keep moving forward after something like that happens. But also note that things like that I can't plan for either. So it's not like I'm thinking ahead of time after something like that happens. Like I've crossed the crocodile-infested river. Now there might be a guy with a shotgun. You know, man, you just can't. You can't plan for that. You can't even dream that up. You can nightmare it up, but you can't dream it up. So you know, it's once you've gone through it, you feel amazing, and you feel bulletproof. And I think anyone who's ever, you know, really faced their own fears and stepped through it and made it to the other side realizes how amazing that feels. You know, you realize that you are a lot stronger and a lot tougher than you otherwise thought you were.
So you've run this race. You've also done the Israel National Trail, which was 1,009 kilometers, and that seems relatively fast in comparison to the Bicentennial Trail. This one took you 9 days. What was the difference here? Why is it so much faster to do 1,000 kilometers in 12 days?
Well, it's not faster. It's just I decided to up the ante. So what happened was, you see, so I've done a bunch of these, as you noted. I've done a bunch of these sort of long distance, I guess, adventurous kind of runs all over the world in all sorts of scenarios. Israel, for example, was missiles flying overhead, had a severe foot infection, nearly had amputation, a whole bunch of crazy stuff, right? But it wasn't quicker. The exciting part is that I'd finished doing the Bicentenary National Trail, 5,500 kilometers. Between that, I'd then gone to New Zealand, around 3,500 kilometers, literally 2 weeks after finishing the 5,500, straight to New Zealand. And I was just looking for the next thing, but it wasn't really just the next trail to go and run or the next country to go and run across. It was like, okay, well, now I've done these things. I want to raise the bar. I want to make it more challenging for me. So really, I went from running a marathon a day to running 2 marathons a day and more to get the trail done. So, you know, that 1,000, it was actually 1,009 kilometers. And I think the 9's important, right? It is still 9Ks. So 1,009 kilometers. And yeah, I just decided that I'm going to put 85 Ks a day to get this done. And that's a whole new experience, you know, but once you complete that, it's like, okay, what's next? I'm always looking for something that's going to challenge me physically and mentally. And what I love about, or what I should say I have loved, because my adventures tend to be a little bit different now, but what I have loved is the fact that these kind of endurance feats really leave you physically fatigued, as you can imagine. But what I love about that is then I love to be challenged mentally when I'm at fatigue like that. So I'm looking for countries, in this case Israel, that have a little bit of danger to them. You know, I like the fact that there was some missiles I got fired overhead, because I'm tired and exhausted, and now I have to work out how I'm going to move through that chaotic moment. And now everything I put myself into, I'm always looking for what's going to really challenge me physically and mentally, to the point where I might break. You know, and that sounds ludicrous to a lot of people, but that's what excites me. And that's really where my work is now, is really the human response to, I guess, change and challenge and crisis and chaos. I'm fascinated with that moment where you make a decision or you don't make a decision. You know, that really, I find that area fascinating.
They say don't travel with Tom Hanks because the aircrafts that he's on, they keep crashing. If you traveled with Richard, you'll get a shotgun put in your mouth and missile shot overhead.
Well, I thought you meant that in a different way, Daniel. I thought you said don't travel with Tom Hanks because you get coronavirus. I thought that's what you were going to
say. Well, you could just run away from it. You can deal with the distance. So you've been doing this, but something that you've also done is you lived on the streets of India for a week, and you were involved in a rickshaw project. Can you give us a insight into what the rickshaw puller project was?
Yeah. So now what I do is, in my work, I run a consulting company, and basically I've taken all these adventures, and what I do is I sit down with a whole bunch of psychological experts. We have a team of people that really unpack what I've done, the experiences that I've had, and then we kind of leverage that with neuroscience and psychology, and then we design these development programs for leaders and organizations all across the world. And so these projects I choose now is not about running at all. You know, really that was, I guess, the warm up for the things that I go and choose to do now. This rickshaw project was in Kolkata in India, in the northeast. I spent a week, as you mentioned there, living and working as what they call a hand-pulled rickshaw walla. So for those people that don't know what that is, they've probably heard of a cycle rickshaw, an auto rickshaw, a tuk-tuk, that kind of thing. And basically a hand-pulled rickshaw is a two-seated wooden cart that a very weary old man generally pulls on foot. So he's like a horse, and often he's barefoot when he does it. These guys are in absolute extreme poverty, so they live on the streets, they eat on the streets, and work around about 18 hours a day pulling the rickshaw in the hope to earn just $2 a day, Australian. So, you know, it's a really challenging environment even for them. What I was fascinated about is how do these people decide to get up every day? What drives these people? How do they overcome this adversity and the challenges that go with it? Because in a country like India, if anyone's ever been, it's chaotic at the best of times. And when you sort of don't have the means to deal with that chaos and, I guess, the health risks associated with living on the streets and stuff, it becomes really, really challenging. So I wanted to go and spend time with them. And really, these other adventures we just briefly spoke about have really given me the ability to be able to go into these environments, do exactly as they do, but not make it about me. Because if I did it before I'd done all these other crazy things that we spoke about, I think it would have been about me having the rats crawl over me each night, and me being exhausted, and me not eating correctly, and me being treated badly by some of the customers, and the other dangers that sort of go with the job. So, you know, it was just an insightful moment for me. It was an opportunity for me to see how they dealt with it and really sort of dig into their psychology in real time. Which is not something I've been able to do necessarily on some of the other sort of endurance adventures that I've done, because one, I guess, first of all, it's been about me. And the second thing is that you don't often think about the process when you're going through it. It's not until after the fact. And I feel that after the fact's not always the best way to understand something necessarily, because you are a different person after you've overcome something. So it was really nice to do it in real time. That's a long answer, I know, but I hope it ticked all the boxes.
I'm there. I've got the rats crawling over me. I was thinking about my wife and I. We went to Bangladesh and we saw these rickshaw drivers, and you mentioned they earned $2 Australian a day. And what I learned there as well is that the ones in Bangladesh, they, out of that $2, they had to pay $1 to hire the rickshaw, and they were only keeping $1 for themselves. And they lived in these little humpies. It was a shed like 2 meters by 3 meters. They lived on the floor. Outside their toilet was a hole in the ground with a bag of lime. And life is just so basic. And I know what they go through. They're malnourished. They don't have good food. They don't have good quality water. There's no sanitation. And that is hard work on the rickshaw. I'm 95 kilos. I sat in the back of the rickshaw. I should have paid twice the price because I was twice as heavy as everybody else. And it's tough work. So you've had these experiences. Australia's on lockdown. The world's on lockdown. What can we take away from your learnings and apply to our experience as we go through these lockdowns of COVID-19? What can we learn from your resiliency, and how can we apply this to our life right now?
Yeah, look, I've been asked this question a lot, and it's been exciting to work through and understand what's currently happening, you know, because people often ask me what the next adventure is, and to be quite frank, I feel like I'm in it. You know what I mean? Because it's if you're looking for something that's uncertain and complex and difficult and challenging and frightening and all those things that I push myself into, it's right now. So it's kind of, for me, it's almost a little bit exciting to some degree to explore the feelings and emotions that come up with such a global pandemic, you know, and sort of work with and explore other people's mindsets around that. I mean, there's a lot I could teach people, of course, you know, and there's different segments and different ideas for the different challenges that people face. If we just go back just to the rickshaw example, I mean, something I found there was something that was extremely basic, I guess, but essential, which was these rickshaw pullers. You know, they have nothing. They live on the street, but what they're very good at is having a routine. You know, they've got a very strong routine and they adhere to it. It doesn't shift for anything. And it's very simple because basically they live on the streets. So they live in and they sleep in and then they work, and they sleep and they work. That's kind of their day. But what fascinated me was the fact that it arise at the same time every single day with no alarm clock, which is fascinating, sort of 3:30 a.m. They'd go wash, they'd go pray, and then they'd get their rickshaw and get down to the train station for the first arrivals at 4 a.m. And then they'd work pretty much for the whole day. And the middle of the day, sorry, I lie, was always about preparing food. And then in the evening, they'd eat that food. And it seems pretty basic to people, but that never changed. And when I tried to change that, that's when I learned the lesson, because I decided that, well, I was under this particular old gentleman's wing. He was 75 years old. He'd lost his wife and he'd been pulling a rickshaw since he was 20. Crazy, right? So this uncle, so I called him, took me under his wing, and I said to him one morning, "Uncle, I'm not going to wash this morning because I don't see the point. Right? I'm sleeping on the streets, and I'm about to head off into the pollution, which is Kolkata city, to get dirty and sweaty in the heat. I don't get it." And he said, "You have to wash. You have to, Richard." I said, "Well, I don't actually have to." He goes, "No, you must. What's wrong with you? No, you're delirious." And what he explained to me is that, something as simple as washing on the streets of India is so important for their hygiene. He said that you have to do it. You can get sick. If you get sick, you can't afford any kind of medication or a doctor's visit on the street, and you can potentially die. So he said that's the first thing. The second thing he said is that you will not get another opportunity to wash again today. There's water at certain times of day. Your street washing, you just won't happen. I thought, isn't that interesting? How I think that you should always have a routine for the fundamentals of your work or your life. And I think people take that for granted at times. Put something off and with the hope it might happen, but often it doesn't because other things come in the way. But also what I took from that was that it's the environment is so chaotic that you can't try and think his way out of the complexity of it throughout the day if you're still considering, I've got to exercise later, I've got to feed myself later, I've got to wash myself later. So it's almost like they remove all the fundamentals so they have the ability to think in the chaos. So they have this enormous amount of clarity in the crazy stuff. But I also think all that, you can have the best routine in the world, you can have the best schedule in the world, but I think it comes with a bit of a caveat. And that probably is the fact that the only reason why that amazing routine that you lay down doesn't work is because of you. So I feel that you have to work on yourself before you can actually work on the routine itself. I think you have to understand what's going to stop me from doing these things on the routine. I think if you can work through that and figure out how you might move through and pass and around those sticking points along the day or the journey, then, it's going to make life a lot easier. So I learned a lot about myself there too in that kind of scenario.
Incredible. Ladies and gentlemen, lessons from a 5 times world record holder. Now, Richard, our friends will want to learn more about you. Where's the best place to follow you on social media or on the internet right now?
Yeah, well, if you just type in Richard Bowles Adventurer or Richard Bowles Runner, there's a whole bunch of stuff that comes up for me. You'll find me. It's not difficult to find me. Just hook up on LinkedIn, Instagram, that kind of thing.
Wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll put the link below. And Richard, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for sharing your stories. After that story of putting the gun in your mouth, I think I might have shit my pants after that. So I'm going to go wash.
Yeah, well, that's always the part. That's always the part of the story that I don't tell people, right?
Thanks, mate. You have a wonderful day and stay safe during COVID. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Daniel. No worries.
5 times world record holder, Richard Bowles. Thank you so much, mate. Wonderful.